Hi everyone, this is Carmina. I'm an astrologer and card reader, and today I have been guested on Michael's Read channel to talk to him about the upcoming lunar and solar eclipse. I also have a YouTube channel. If you want to see what kind of videos I do about astrology and cards, you can check out Your Stars Align. So, thank you very much, Michael, for having me. I look forward to talking to you about these eclipses. And I would like to say, to begin by saying, where does this word eclipse come from, right? Well, in our language, eclipse comes from Greek, right? And it means disappearance. So that astronomically shows the disappearance of the moon or a part of the moon. And that happens when the Earth, the Sun, and the Moon align into space, and the Earth kind of gets sandwiched between the two luminaries, right?
Hmm.
Yeah, so it's like the Earth's orbital plane, which is called the ecliptic, and twice a month the Moon intersects that ecliptic at points called nodes, and when that Moon is full and it gets close to one of the two nodes, then an eclipse happens, right?
Oh, most definitely. Yes.
So I think it's also interesting that these eclipses come in pairs, right? For instance, that last eclipse from last year in August, the south node was involved, and then there was a total solar eclipse on August 21st, where the north node was the guilty party of covering up the sun. So, like, how do you see these eclipses like influencing people's life? Because I can definitely see it as influencing the weather, right? I mean, the eclipse that was in August triggered some intense weather manifestations, and right now I'm even seeing like it started snowing very heavily, and it's like 2 weeks before the lunar eclipse. What have you noticed about that?
Myself, I have actually been noticing some weather changes on this end too. For the last 2 or 3 days, we've been having here in the UK some very windy weather, like
Mm,
wind howling outside the window, like gusts. I'm not looking to see how fast the gusts are, but pretty strong gusts, more so
yeah,
than
sure.
usual.
It's
And I'm
so.
actually by the sea too, so it's the seas are swelling up too. I think obviously the moon's phases have an eclipse on the tides and things like that in general, and the weather in general, and um, obviously the motion of the planets can influence that. I thought of something that might be interesting to share with the viewers, though, if that's okay with you. Yeah,
Of course.
which is kind of what happens to us as individuals with the eclipses, right?
Yeah.
Because if we understand that the sun and the moon are really two different aspects of the self,
Hmm.
okay, and on a broad scale, because the moment we start speaking words out of our mouth and say the sun is this and the moon is this, is the moment we invite in other people going in and going, oh, no, 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 it's this and it's this and it's this and that, right? And so we're aware that there are a lot of different interpretations of it, but the sun relates to the atman, and so it relates to the soul of everything. And as individuals, we're connected to that soul of everything. We have a part of that inside of ourself. So the sun relates to that aspect of our individual self that's able to connect to the atman, to the soul, so to speak. Whereas the moon relates to the manas, or the sensory mind, which is different, because the sensory mind um, will not always perceive things correctly. Now, let's kind of use that as somewhat of a detour. What is correctly? There is no real correct. There is just life and what happens when it's going on. So, on that level, it is correct, so to speak. But whereas the pure truth, which is known to the Atman, which while we're here and we're incarnated, until we have worked through all of our karmic luggage, we're not really able to be clear or that pure with that. The function of the moon, the function of the sensory mind, is to be able to be pure and to be able to hold that light of the sun, to hold the light of the Atman and reflect that in a pure state.
Hmm.
But the moon waxes and wanes. It becomes full and is able to do it at some times, and at other times it wanes and it becomes a little bit weaker. And it's backwards and forwards between those. So, manas, or the sensory mind, relates more to the subjective experience that the individual is going through. Whereas the Atman, or the soul of everything, or the part of the individual that's connected to the soul of everything, just accepts things as they are.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So when we have eclipses, what is happening is when you have the solar eclipse, you have a connection between the Atman and the Manas and one of the nodes, either Ketu or Rahu.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those are going to impact the energy of that connection in a very intense manner. But what's really interesting about this is what the nodes are is the point at which the plane of the sun, or the Atman, and the plane of the Manas cross each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's where those things connect and disconnect. And so, in short, it's almost like a cosmic manifestation of those things that create duality in our existence.
Mm. But what a very interesting perspective. I really love hearing that because I was also thinking there's this similarity between the sun and moon and the nodes, because the nodes are also a pair and the sun and moon are also a pair, right? Because they are the only grahas that rule one sign each, right? So together they form a pair, and also they relate to the crown chakra. So I think it's very interesting when these two pairs meet, the fated pair of the nodes and the sun and moon pair of, of our mind and our universal soul. So I think that's a very good metaphor of
Mm-hmm.
existence.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting because where the cosmic manifestation, that sounds really foofy, I know. So where the cosmic manifestation of the Atman and the Manas crossing each other in space occurs, is something is created that creates an eclipse, potentially, of both of those factors, where we are either not able to perceive things clearly through the manas or through the sensory mind, or we kind of go through somewhat of a disconnect with the soul,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak. So it's somewhat of a material manifestation of the intersection of those two things, or where those two things can either come into conflict with each other or join each other. So at each moment, and especially at eclipses, we're kind of being shown these periods of time where we have an opportunity to more deeply um, join those two forces together. Of course, that opportunity is always there, but it's a really powerful moment
During
to
that.
help us to connect to that. And if we understand the nakshatra, or I should say probably nakshatras that are connected to the eclipses, then we can come to an understanding of how we're being asked to grow our consciousness or grow our psyche for the next certain amount of time, because eclipses, they have a knock-on effect. So we'll have an eclipse on the 31st, the lunar eclipse on the 31st, and we'll have the solar eclipse on February 15th. But that's not it. We still carry those changes with us, for the next 6 months and further onward.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's a really powerful time. And what I always like
Are you still there, Michael? Okay, are you still there now?
I'm still here. What was the last thing you heard? My internet disconnected. I'm going to reconnect us to it.
Yeah, you were talking about the effects that we feel of the nakshatras, that we feel those like for the next 6 months, or like we carry them on. It's not just a momentary thing, right? And that's
It's
a temporary effect.
it's most definitely very prominent. And everybody, please forgive me while I multitask.
Yeah, yeah, and it's also interesting. So for the eclipse, that not only we look at the rashes, like you were saying, we are also like we're looking at the nakshatras, and that brings me to a question. A lot of our, especially your audience, is from India, and I know that a lot of people in India use the Lahiri and Amsha for,
Mm-hmm.
the nakshatras, and they say that this upcoming eclipse on January 31st, 2018 is going to be in Pushya, right? But
Mm-hmm.
we are thinking Aslesha, which is quite of a difference in tonality. What do you
And
want to say about that?
And I recognize that that can be very confusing for a lot of people. And that's actually a question I get asked quite often. Um, First of all, one thing I want to say, and everybody can differ in opinion with me, and they have every right to do that, but they're all wrong and I'm right at the end of the day. No, I'm only kidding. Um, the thing is there are many different opinions. Some people are saying Pusha, as you said. Some people are saying Ashlesha. The thing is none of us can ever really know where something is aligning with in the sky because we're viewing something from our perspective here on earth, where even if we're looking at an alignment to something that's up in the sky, we're going to be looking at it through the lens of local space, and so that's going to distort it on a certain level anyway. If you're at the equator on the planet, that's going to be a little clearer on that level, but still, unless you are able to um, hop in a spacecraft, go out with all sorts of measuring equipment into outer
Wait for a
space, and
second. I'm just posting the link so that
that's
more
okay.
people can join.
That's fine. Unless you're able to journey out in space in order to do that and measure it, you can't really know exactly. So, what I use for my nakshatra interpretation is a calculation that's based upon the pole star, Dhruva, and the equator. And so, if you imagine that my hand here is like the Earth, okay? And so the pole star helps us to judge where the poles of the planet are. And then we have the equator, going around the middle of the planet. If you make a right angle from the pole star to the equator and then judge the longitude of a fixed star in relation to that, that is the basis for the calculations that I'm using. Okay, so let's talk Ayanamsha because that also affects nakshatra calculations too. Because not everybody out there, as I'm sure a large part of our astrological community know, not everybody uses Lahiri Ayanamsha. Okay, there are so many different Ayanamshas that are in use. Um, and so it creates a difference even between two people who are using the same zodiac. Granted, I use a tropical zodiac with sidereal nakshatras, and I always say that and then duck my head and stuff like that for people who might want to throw things in a joking manner. Um, but at the same time, I always want to be very clear and tell people that if you're using a sidereal zodiac, using the Dhruva equatorial coordinates is not going to give you as accurate of an interpretation in connection with the nakshatras as will using the normal calculation which people use, which connects the nakshatra position to the ecliptic. Okay, because what you're actually doing with the sidereal zodiac is you're trying to connect the fixed stars of the constellations to the zodiac itself. And so you're trying to connect the ecliptic to the fixed stars. But if you're using a tropical zodiac with sidereal nakshatras, what's going on in that particular instance is there are two separate circles. There's a circle of the ecliptic, which creates the zodiac, and then there's the circle of the stars, which creates the nakshatras. So in using that system, you're looking at two separate circles, and you have to find a system that works of keeping the sidereal nakshatra positions in association to the tropical zodiac position. That's probably as clear of a way as I can explain it. And so, what will happen? I actually have a diagram, and I can share it with people. And this is from Ernst Wilhelm's site. I'll share that so that people are aware of where it comes from. And let me bring it up and make it a little bit larger for our guests. So what you have here is a very confusing picture unless you know what it is. And so I'm going to explain. So basically, this blue circle in the middle, that's the Earth. Okay, this yellow ellipse, that's the ecliptic. So that's the path of the sun.
Right now.
Exactly. It looks like Saturn. The blue line in the middle here, that's the equator. So this is the ecliptic. Okay. So these numbers up here, these are the nakshatras, which are divisions of space too. So the thing is if you attempt to judge the position of a fixed star in regard to where it intersects the ecliptic, it will appear to be right here where you see my red pointer. But in actuality, out in space, it could be somewhere way over here. Now, if you see, that's a completely different section of space. Okay. And so in using the calculations that both myself and you are using, then it ends up being necessary in order to get a truer longitude of that actual fixed star to come up with a calculation that's going to give you a more accurate representation of that for your particular calculations. And I want to be clear in saying for your particular calculations. Than using the ecliptic for it, because otherwise it wouldn't give you a clear and accurate interpretation. So is that saying that one system is right and the other one is wrong? No, it's not. It's just saying that the two systems are right for two completely independent systems, and none of us at present really have an absolutely perfect science yet. Because what are we trying to do? We're trying to judge the will of God or the will of the universe, right?
Exactly.
The moment you think you're perfect in that is the moment you get, for lack of a better way to put it, a cosmic slapdown, right?
Very.
And so, right.
Very well said. Thank you for explaining that, because people get confused so often. Hey, wait, but I thought this was the sign, but I think this is it. So thank you for explaining, and I think you will have to explain it again. I have a feeling it's not the last time you will be explaining it.
I do it all the time. As a
But
matter of fact, I have a text document that I copy and paste into the comments section over and over again because I'm so used to doing it.
okay, so thank you for bringing that up. And since we were talking about it, okay, so this following eclipse is going to be, I want to mention, it's going to be an eclipse in Aslesha, which is ruled by Mercury, right? And Mercury is also going to be like opposite at that moment.
Mercury is going to be in the moon's nakshatra, which is Shravana. And
that relates.
Well, the feel I got on this particular interaction, and the way I judge this is by using something called the Baladi Avastas and the Jagradati Avastas. It helps me to judge strength of a particular planet. And so in doing that, both Mercury and the moon, because of where they're at in their respective signs, are somewhat weakened and compromised on that level. So what you've got is the more intuitive, more reflective side of the mind that is somewhat weakened in its capacity to feel that it's able to intuit properly, right? That's one angle on it. And you've got the more differentiation-oriented side of the mind, which is Mercury, in a weakened capacity too. And so it creates this pull between those two forces, where what you have going on is you're not really sure if you can trust your intuitive capacity in regards to the situation that's going on in your life. And you're not really sure if you're able to analyze the situation correctly either. So it creates a lot of confusion. And because this is in Ashlesha Nakshatra, Ashlesha has this tendency to kind of pull us into a trance. And it's going to pull us in one particular direction. And sometimes dependent upon the power of that pull. And dependent upon the power of Mercury, it's going to pull us in that particular direction in a manner that's going to help us to really focus on one pointed focus in relation to that and pull us into something very deeply. And then sometimes when the mind is not quite as strong or able to focus, it will pull us in one direction and then it'll move into another direction, just like a serpent moves, right? And when a serpent is getting ready to attack its prey, it will try to confuse that prey. It'll move from
Like a
side to side.
hypnotic dance.
Exactly. And so the mind is getting pulled in all sorts of directions like that in that particular manner at the time of the eclipse. And both, I think it's mainly the moon. And so, in other words, the lunar eclipse itself is forming an angle to Jupiter. Now, a lot of readers may not understand, or viewers may not understand, but just to voice it, the planets are always creating aspects to each other. And so there are other aspects outside of the ordinary planets in opposing signs, the ordinary graha aspects. As a matter of fact, this is all listed in Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra, the strength of an aspect. Based on 0 to 60. So the moon and Jupiter are forming an aspect to each other, and Jupiter is in Vishaka itself. And so in some area of our lives, we're kind of in between worlds, so to speak. We can feel a change that's getting ready to happen, and we're ready to kind of leave the old situation behind, but we're not quite in that new situation yet. We're kind of in between, and there's this purification thing that's going on, and we're beginning to kind of have hints and understandings about the type of direction that we need to go in, but mixed in with that, we're not really sure, because let's face it, those of us who trust in our intuition, we like to be able to trust our intuition. And those of us who are more analytically oriented, we like to be able to feel that we can trust in our logic and trust in our intellect. But when you can't trust in either of those, and you're kind of feeling like you're in between things, then you don't really know which direction to go in. And so it's confusing. Also mixed in with that is this particular eclipse is happening with Rahu. And
it brings a further confusion.
Most definitely. And Rahu moon connections generally tend to, so you think of the subjective side of ourselves. There's something that we're either hiding from ourselves, right? Or something that we're hiding from another individual. And let's talk on that level for a second, too, because you say that and it sounds like, oh, we're doing something, evil or wrong. And that's not necessarily the case, because, we're all private individuals. We go through our own private processes in life. And so it's just that your consciousness may be in a position where it's not able to access how it feels about something. And so then it's unclear as to how you can convey that information to another individual, right? This is likely going on, that particular aspect of it is likely going on in the area of your chart where the actual eclipse is happening. So, wherever Rahu and the moon are falling in this particular eclipse that's where that's going to come into being.
It's more powerful if it falls into angles, or if it falls like if it connects to self factors, or do you look at Vargas as well, or just the Rashi chart when you judge that?
Yeah, well, in terms of aspects itself, what I would do, and this is generally how I tend to work with things, and that's a good question, is I tend to look at the dasha that the individual's in. And I look at what is coming to the surface for them. So let's say, for instance, you happen to be a Capricorn ascendant, and this particular eclipse is falling in your 8th house, right? So we need to take that in association with all the different areas of your life that are going on, because the 8th house can mean so many different things. It can mean somebody else's finances, right? So are you in a position, let's say, for instance, you're in your sun dasha, and let's say you've got the sun in Libra and it's somewhat debilitated, right? And it's going through some sort of change or some sort of transformation, right? And let's say it's directly opposite. It's directly opposite your natal moon in the chart, okay? And the moon is the natural Imachakaraka. So there's some problems that you're experiencing with finances, right? And you have this situation going on in your life. So I'm creating a hypothetical situation where, basically you're losing money, right? because the sun's separating you from your money.
Mm-hmm.
And one part of your psyche thinks that, right, well, I can do this because I've got this big inheritance coming up,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then we would need to kind of then at that particular point go look at the other Varga charts and understand what's going on,
Yeah. And
right? Yeah,
pointing that out.
but it would definitely very powerfully bring that to the surface. But it's all in the context of whatever dasha period you
Mm-hmm.
might happen to be in. It could be if there are things in your Vimshamsha chart getting triggered, then you could be, going through some very spiritual devotion oriented times. You could have a strong eighth lord and all sorts of things going on. So it really depends. And that's why it's very difficult to do astrology based just upon the Rashi chart. And that's why I always tell people who come and watch these live YouTube videos to please do not ask me to do a chart interpretation based upon one or two factors in your horoscope.
Yeah, because that creates even more confusion because like a chart is organic, everything is happening interconnected, and you can't look at one isolated thing and judge like, okay, this is gonna be good or bad because that's even bad for the astrologer. He or she gets bad karma for making like a judgment without seeing the whole. So don't make us get bad karma.
Oh, most definitely. And I'm also, just briefly on that particular subject. Quite often, I have people who will come onto my live videos, and in those particular instances, because they are people who are, avidly interested in astrology, if somebody asks a question about their chart and I say, well, I'm not going to answer that, and here's the reason why, somebody else will kind of jump out and answer it for the individual. And I'm always kind of big on going, you might want to be careful with that because you're not looking at the person's whole chart, and you're kind of sure we're all responsible for our own individual karma. But if you're giving somebody a suggestion based upon something, then on a certain level, you're planting a seed for that individual. And you need to be careful what seeds you're really wanting to plant for that individual,
Mm-hmm.
right? Are you planting a seed of hope, or are you planting a seed of, of
Doubt.
difficulty for the individual? And when it boils down to it, unless you're able to really look at all of their Varga charts and get a real understanding of the organic person and the situation they're dealing with, you're likely going to give them information that they go away with. And if, let's say, for instance, you go, oh, well, this is happening in your life, and so you're going to have a really good time with this because you're in your Jupiter dasha, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're in your Jupiter dasha and Jupiter's exalted, you're going to have this absolutely wonderful Jupiter period. That may not be the case. You
Yeah.
could have Jupiter debilitated in several of your different Varga charts, and then you're sitting there going, why didn't this happen? And you've
Yeah,
had
and
all these
Mars,
expectations.
yeah,
Yeah,
and Mars takes the effects of Jupiter, and Jupiter is average.
most definitely,
Yeah.
most definitely. So you
Okay.
always have to take things in context of things. And so I'm glad you actually asked, what would I look at in order to understand that. So if I understood that this was happening in a person's eighth house, I would see also if they were in a dasha period that was bringing to the surface a lot of eighth house related things,
Mm-hmm.
and where that was happening. And I would go explore all the different areas connected to that until I had an answer, and then I'd come out with the answer based upon that.
Yeah, and I wanted to relate what you were saying about this energy of this incoming lunar eclipse that you feel kind of confused about what to do. On the Kala forum, we also like discussed this eclipse a little, and there is this book about Grady Bernadette, and people reference it a lot in relation to the eclipses. And she says that this one will be an eclipse where you are quite, I mean, you are feeling your ideas come in too hastily and you're not sure whether they're right, but like you should be going with the flow of the inspiration. So it's kind of like, yes, it's like, I don't know, you don't know, like you were saying, you're confused whether this is like the right idea. Is this my.
Most definitely, and it's interesting because we have this new translation of something called the Nakshatra Sutras that's out now.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it requires a lot of like meditating upon the meaning of all of these different factors, they're very powerful if you do that. And basically involved in this particular eclipse is Ashlesha Nakshatra, Shravana Nakshatra, and Dhanishta Nakshatra.
I'm gonna interrupt
Um,
you for a
Go
little
ahead,
bit.
sure.
people, when they usually think of some of these nakshatras that have like harsh or violent qualities, they think they are bad or evil. I mean, I've seen so
Definitely.
many times like, oh my god, this is a bad nakshatra, I'm born in a bad nakshatra. But this is not like, it doesn't mean that you're a bad person, because sometimes you need to be more forceful or more violent. There are some, I mean, it's just a manner in which, like, the energy flows. It's not like to judge the whole person's character on the moon's nakshatra.
Most definitely, yes. Yeah, good point. And it's interesting too because Ashlesha Nakshatra is a sharp and a really harsh
Yes,
nakshatra. But, if you
are a
sometimes we
surgeon.
well, yeah, and sometimes we have to be very assertive in order to create changes. And there's definitely, and I'm glad you brought that up because there's definitely a tone of that to this eclipse, is not a confrontation with another individual necessarily, but a confrontation with your capacity to be firm about something,
Mhm.
right? And it's also a Jiva Nakshatra, and Jiva Nakshatras need to learn when to lead and when not to take the lead.
Mhm.
And so another area that this might be impacting a lot of people is, should I do this or should I um, follow somebody else's lead or, look for direction that things need to go in. But I was hoping to really be able to share some of these factors with our guests
Yes.
because really there are some very interesting things.
Mhm.
Um, Let me find the particular pages.
Yeah. In the meantime, you guys can ask us some questions relating to the eclipse, and at the end, like after we talk about this a bit more, we will take some of your questions.
Most definitely, most definitely. So it's rather big text here, but I'm going to bring it up. Let me share the screen with our viewers. And so, really, you can understand a lot of the energy of this eclipse by just reading this.
Mm.
It's really powerful. It will teach you so much about how energy is growing. First of all, basically, what the nakshatras are is they're like this gift that's given to us to grow ourselves, to grow our consciousness. And it's a reminder that whilst we may feel kind of cast out of a state of bliss, we're not really. We've got that connection to divinity inside of ourselves. And
Mhm.
there's always a section of each particular sutra that says for a particular deity,
Yes.
right? Of a particular deity. And then two of them say for a particular deity, a particular power. And then it says from above. That from above isn't something that's separate from you, it's you connecting to the higher aspect of yourself, higher self, whatever it is you want to call it. And
Mhm.
then from below, the lower aspect of yourself, which isn't necessarily to say one part is bad and one is good. Both of those have to work in harmony with each other. So with Ashlesha Nakshatra itself, the embraces of Sarpa, the serpents, are approaching indirectly from above and indirectly dancing towards from below. And so there you go. You have that energy of being pulled in all these different directions. And that feels confusing. We don't like that. We like for things to be certain. But part of the processes of life are being pulled in all of those different directions. And quite often, we would never come to the realization or understanding that we need to come to if we hadn't had that experience,
Mhm.
right? That's how nakshatras work in general. That's why you find that about um, a large majority of people who work with nakshatras have a very hard time pinning down the interpretation of the nakshatra.
Yeah.
And it's because they're very subjective. They're going to vary wildly as per particular situation and influences upon them. On some levels, they don't make sense. And so then in terms of us astrologers trying to figure it out, it doesn't make sense to us
Yeah.
because you have to also open up the more intuitive aspect of your mind in order to understand it. So, really, in order to work with nakshatras really well, you need a combination of analytical but also very intuitive
Intuitive. Yeah.
faculties of your mind. So, let's go look at the ones for Shravana because I really like this particular one
Mhm.
for Shravana. Let's see if I can find it.
Yeah. And I like this quality about Aslesha that it's approaching indirectly, so you don't quite see it coming, right? So,
Most definitely. Good point. Good point. Now, this one's going to sound really odd. The cripples of Vishnu. Okay, so that you look at that and you go, what does that mean? The cripples of Vishnu are inquiring ideas from above and the paths from below. Now, everybody will read that and they will have their own meanings, and they're meant to interpret those and have their own meanings because that's what these sutras are about. And it reveals all the different meanings of the nakshatra. But basically, so what is Vishnu? Vishnu is the all pervasive. It's the aspect of God that pervades everything, right? But quite often we get lost in form and we miss the essence. Okay, so our inquiring ideas from above. So the cripples of Vishnu, or one of the things that cripples us in association with the all pervasive, is inquiring ideas from above. Our mind goes this way, it goes the other way, and actually, Shravana nakshatra is a monkey nakshatra, so it's all over the place. It's like the monkey side of the mind that kind of jumps from this to that. So it's inquiring ideas from above, and the more ideas we have, the more paths we can see. So there's a side of Shravana nakshatra that when the moon is not quite as strong as it could be, it can create a directionless mind that is uncertain as to where it should head, which direction it should go in. And it creates a lot of confusion in that regard. Ultimately, we want to be able to have a clear, reflective mind that sees several different potential paths and the way to clearly get to them, and to be able to weigh all those aspects in a state of clarity in order to come up with a sense of direction. So speaking of direction, let's take a look at Vishaka Nakshatra. And I'll try not to eat up too much of the time doing this.
no, I think this is very important, right? Because these sutras are like the core of one of the, if not like the most essential depiction of these qualities of these nakshatras, right? So
I completely,
directing of
yeah,
them.
I completely agree. I sometimes think that people might be getting bored of me reading all these now because I've been going over them so much. But it's really important information. It is, and I can't stress that enough. And what's great about it is you can read over these again and again, and you'll get all sorts of new meanings. So this is where Jupiter is, and remember, Jupiter is involved in this angle to the lunar eclipse too. So at the branch of Indra and Agni. Okay, so Indra's the conqueror. Um, there are so many different meanings of that are based upon the mythological stories connected to Indra. But one of the things that Indra did was conquer his senses. But he's also in charge of sensory delights and very deeply connected to sensory delights. And there's a message there, which is in order to be able to enjoy sensory delights in a positive manner, we also must be in control of our senses and not let that aspect of life influence us to the extent that we're not. So the conqueror, it's the one who has conquered their mind, who has conquered their senses, right? So at the branch or at the fork of Indra, the conqueror, and Agni, the fire, purification. So that's saying that in order to get clarity on direction, you need to be able to conquer your senses and be able to see things clearly. And that's likely going to involve a purification process.
And also like to conquer like the fire of your intuition, so to direct like consciously maybe the fire of your inspiration, not your intuition, the
Yeah.
fire of your inspiration.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. And so the branch of Indra and Agni are yokes from above. So when we're able to do that, we're pulled towards our higher sensory awareness and crops from below. And where like our human consciousness is kind of harvested and pulled in a certain direction, right? When we're able to understand the nature of existence itself. But in regards to this particular situation with this eclipse, there's a lot of unclarity. And so one part of you has your foot in one, like going forward, and the other part of you is still not ready to move on yet. And you're kind of in between spaces because there's an uncertainty in direction. Now, basically, Ketu at the time of this eclipse is in Dhanishta Nakshatra, and
Yeah.
Dhanishta is equally very important. In this text, it's called Shravishta.
Yeah.
Okay, so the most famous ones of the Vasuna, the excellent ones, are the past from above and the thriving from below. There's a
Mm-hmm.
lot that's stated there. One of the things that's stated is, where do we ultimately come from? So you might say, well, I was born here, so that's where I come from. But where do you ultimately come from? Right? And are you able to connect to that past of the source that you came from? Well, when you're able to do that, then you're able to thrive because you're not losing sight of who you are spiritually. You're not losing sight of your connection with that. But equally, you'll find with the Nishta Nakshatra, there's this certain tone of, in order to do what is right uh, in regards to the particular situation that anybody might be affected by, you need to understand your origin or how you got to that particular space.
Mm-hmm.
And that's going to help you to achieve the level of abundance that you need to get from that particular situation. But see, the problem is we say abundance or we say prosperity, and immediately people's minds go to money
Yeah.
or success and prospero, prospirit, that which is beneficial for the spirit. It's
Yeah.
not always, that which is going to fill your wallet, so to speak, or that's going to make you rich and famous. Even though it says the most famous ones, it doesn't mean that everything Danishta oriented has a connection with fame. There's so
Mm-hmm.
many different meanings of it. And so with this particular situation, there's this confusion of direction, and the way to really sort through that confusion is to really just kind of pause, especially since you have 1 foot forward and 1 foot back. Look at what brought you here. Look at what brought you to this particular moment in time. And through doing that, it's not to say, and I stated this in the most recent video I did on this about a few weeks ago, it's not to say that something that you did in the past is the right thing to do again.
Mm-hmm.
That's not where I'm coming from with that. It's just saying that the process of reflecting on what brought you here is likely going to help you to make a wise decision
Mm-hmm.
in regard to the next steps that you need to take.
Right. Yeah. So it's a very like deep digging nakshatra. Is like like looking for that inspiration from above, from the past, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Shaka before that was a more intense, like the branch, like at the branches, the two energies of the conqueror and the fire were coming together. So it's more like a fiery type
Definitely.
situation. And
Definitely.
yeah, I don't know. Should we take some questions now?
I was thinking that too. Sorry, I apologize for the stuff in the background, everybody. We can do that. And I was actually just refreshing the page so that there was a chance to do that. So let me see.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and if you want to talk for a second while I'm finding a question for us,
Yeah.
then I will see what I can find.
I think this eclipse topic will always be fascinating to people, like back in ancient times, the Vedic mythology of Rahu and Ketu swallowing the moon. And in Europe, we had like the werewolves mythology where like during an eclipse, a werewolf was supposed to swallow the moon. So I think that's very interesting.
Mm,
So like this is like always has been a fascinating topic, and I like that we can, like, we have a platform so we can share like the more psychological aspects and what is happening
most
during
definitely.
time.
Most definitely. And I would also say that the nakshatras are really good thing in terms of understanding the psychological aspect
Yeah.
of things. So I do have a question here.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to hear your angle on this too. So somebody has said, when interpreting eclipses in a personal chart, do you look at houses from the lagna or the moon? Um, I think it really depends on the situation. I tend to, when I'm looking at charts in general, I tend to look more at the Rashi, I mean, at the Lagna, so to speak. Um, but at the same time, I also do a lot of work in the background using Tarabala, which
Mm-hmm.
is really going to kind of judge things from the moon anyway in a nakshatra oriented way. But and this can be misinterpreted. I'm not saying that people should not work with the moon as an ascendant, because that can be a good practice, but you have to understand what you're looking at when you're looking at the moon as an ascendant. You're looking at the subjective experience of the situation, whereas with the lagna, you're looking more at the concrete, what the body is experiencing here on the planet. And so both of those are right and good for their appropriate reasons, right? So for my own interpretations, I tend to focus more on the lagna, um, rather than doing an interpretation both from the lagna and the moon. There is a really wonderful chart for people who really like to kind of twist their brains in all sorts of different directions, though, and it's called Sudarshana chakra, and basically it combines the sun ascendant, the moon ascendant, and
Oh.
the lagna, right?
Yeah, so I agree with you. I also tend to judge the effects of the eclipse from the Lagnam because it's an individual experience. And when
Yes,
somebody asks you, they want to see like their own individual experience and they would like to see like practically, okay, it's in the 10th house, like your career and your public image,
right.
So I think in order for us to give them what they ask for, I think we look at this position from the ascendant. But also, like you were saying, nakshatras are very important, especially when we are talking about an eclipse. Like they're always important, but for an eclipse,
Yes.
the underlying like more unconscious, irrational energy, like that pushes things and that I don't know, you feel it and you don't know why, you can't explain it logically. Nakshatras are very good with that, right?
Most definitely, and kind of you spurred a thought, so I kind of wanted to touch on that, which is really in terms of doing good therapeutic astrology. I
Mm-hmm.
always recommend people who like focusing on the therapeutic side of astrology, in addition to the predictive side of astrology, to really learn the nakshatras, because they're going to give you a real deep understanding of the experience of the individual. What is this individual actually experiencing?
Mm-hmm.
And that's so very important, because at the end of the day, people who come to us as astrologers, they really want to be understood
Yeah, and to understand themselves.
and to
That's
understand themselves.
that's
Very
why
good.
I always look at the avashtas as well because that shows how they feel, and yeah, you can put a conjunction between that and the nakshatras and like get a whole broader picture of
Hmm.
the experience.
Uh-huh. So somebody else has asked, and I want to kind of clarify this. So somebody has
Mhm.
said, do we check Ashlesha, Shravana, and Danishta in the natal chart? I'm not really sure what question they're asking, and so I'm going to
Oh,
answer.
I think they are asking whether, I mean, these nakshatras that are involved with the sun and moon and Jupiter, like you said, right? So they are curious whether these particular nakshatras in their own chart will be affected more
Yeah,
by this.
and that's one angle I was going to go into it on, but there was also another angle, which is yes, if you have planets in those nakshatras, they can very deeply be impacted by
Mm-hmm.
these experiences. So if you've got a planet in Shravana nakshatra, then you're likely going to be having a Mercury transit of some sort going on. If you've got planets in Ashlesha nakshatra, this eclipse is likely going to be happening in close proximity to whatever planet that is. But in addition to that, there are so many different ways to work with nakshatras. I know that there are a large group of astrologers who will look at a different nakshatra in each different Varga chart.
Mm, I don't know.
And I've seen a lot of really accurate information pulled from horoscope charts like that. But I tend to, in my mindset, because my brain goes into the concept of going, if I'm looking at nakshatras, then I'm looking at a relationship to a fixed star. And
Exactly.
if I'm looking at a fixed star, I'm looking at astronomy, and the astronomy happens in the Rashi chart. So I tend to, for myself, which isn't saying that this is right for everybody else and everybody else's system, I tend to take the nakshatra position from the Rashi chart and I transfer that over to a Varga chart. So, for instance, if you have the moon in Ashlesha in your particular horoscope, and the moon happens to be placed in Aries, it's not that that moon is going to be in Bharani now using the system that I use. Instead, the moon is still going to stay in Ashlesha, but it's in Aries in that
Mm-hmm.
particular
Mm-hmm.
horoscope. And that also gives an interesting blend of the energy. So in case
Exactly.
whoever was asking was also asking for that reason too.
Do you
And the
also look at
person
the cusps, like the house cusps?
I do. I actually do a lot of work with house cusp nakshatras too,
Mm,
which kind of explaining something. Maybe I can bring up a chart and share this with people if that's okay with you,
yeah,
right? Because I'm looking at a chart for the eclipse, the solar eclipse, but I can just as easily make it a birth chart.
exactly.
So
Maybe somebody was born then.
exactly. So for instance, something that's interesting to do is, let's say for instance, this person is going into Mars moon
Mm-hmm.
in April. Okay, so basically, what we're able to see is that the moon is the eighth lord from Mars in terms of Rashi's away from it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, the moon rules the eighth from Mars. Well, what you can do with that is you can go in and you can see who the eighth cusp nakshatra is, and that's going to color that eighth house experience in some way, shape, or form. So it will happen in a very Shravana oriented way because this individual, in terms of the eighth house, always has a Shravana connection. And I have found this to be very, very accurate. That moon is placed in the third from Mars, so we can also look at the third house associations, which are Ashlesha. And so I do a lot of work with the nakshatras like that and have a particular way that I've been working with in order to judge the strength or well being of the particular nakshatra. And foundational to that particular understanding is understanding the strength of the moon in your own particular horoscope, because that's going to affect things deeply, but also the strength of the planet that's the dispositor of that
Yeah,
is
I
what
love
I'm
how
tending to do.
different astrologers have different styles and they create their own style of interpreting. So that doesn't mean like one style is better than another style, but
Most definitely.
fits them better. Like they are more drawn to certain techniques and they express with them like what needs to be expressed. So I think that's great.
And that's really what it's about, because if you think about it, we're all individuals here, and
Mm-hmm.
people come to us because they have a connection with us.
Mm-hmm.
They connected
Exactly.
to us specifically to look at their horoscope for them. Some people don't come to us because they connect with somebody else in order to do their reading for them. And that's why I'm never a big thing on astrologers thinking that they have to compete with each other, because it's really
Yeah,
kind of stupid. You don't have to compete with each other, because the person who comes to you
is
is
it
meant to come to you.
exactly. You
Yeah,
have a different sambandha from past lives.
exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't know about you, but I'm running out of time on
Yeah,
my
me
end.
too. But
Okay.
I think we covered a lot today, and I hope the people watching like found some interesting insights. And if you're interested in extrapolating over some of these points, you can do so in the comment section. We'll check the comments. And thank you very much for doing this today, Micah.
Oh, sure, sure. Do you want to tell people about your YouTube channel and your page?
Yeah, I have a YouTube channel. It's called Your Stars Aligned, and I have videos on astrology and on cards. And I also have interviews with different guests. And I have a website, yourstars.align.com, where you can find more info about me and the reading services that I offer if you feel called to do that. So, do you have any classes or something coming up soon,
I
Micah?
actually do. Starting in the spring, I have a fundamentals course for
Mm,
people who are interested. I'm going to be teaching something on the fundamentals course, which isn't on most fundamentals courses, which is about the avastas, the Baladi avastas, because I find that they're very key in doing good predictive astrology as well as good interpretive and psychological astrology. And I also have a nakshatras course that's starting in the spring. And so you can find information about those or schedule a consultation with me on my website at authenticastrology.com.
that sounds very exciting. So, I hope people get into those links. So, thank you very much again for having this conversation today. And yeah, I wish you the best Eclipse experience to everyone.
Most definitely, everybody have a happy eclipse, and thank you for hosting.
Bye.
All right, bye now.